Santos, also known as Kirsten de Mello, is an active board of member of the Spirit Society of Baltimore. She was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to Spiritist parents and was part of the Spiritist Society of Philadelphia before moving to Maryland in 2011. She has participated in the Spiritist Medical Congress and multiple Spiritist symposiums here in the U.S. Professionally, she's a registered nurse with experience in critical care and case management. So thank you so much, Kirsten, and now you have the place to talk. Thank you.
Thank you all so much for having me back again. This is a pleasure to be with all of you. And just want to make sure, is my mic on? Yes, okay. Just want to make sure. I'm so grateful to be talking about gratitude and to be utilizing yet again one of Joanna de Angelis's books, Psychology of Gratitude. If you don't own a copy, you are definitely missing out. It's a phenomenal book, and it's definitely not a book that you want to read one time. It definitely is something that you want to have always on hand or nearby to grab, because we learn with Joanna and really with modern science that gratitude is much more way and beyond just a word or something that seems like it's a fad, in modern times that we're living in, new age kind of thing. But really there's a whole science behind it as well, which we'll get into here in a second. But normally when we give these talks, when we present about gratitude, one of the things that we like to do, and this is the first time I'm doing it because I'm doing it, obviously this is all virtual. Normally I'm used to giving it in front of people in a room. However, with that being said, the actual act itself of uttering the words, I'm grateful for ... or writing it down actually has a very positive effect on our mental, emotional, and physical state. I don't know if it would be possible to open the floor, or if people just want to write something down, or if they just want to think it at this moment. But if you could think of 3 things right now that you are most grateful for. Okay, sorry, technical stuff over here. But if anyone wanted to share what they're most grateful for, then that's totally okay. If not, some people can be shy, and that's all right too.
Isabel? Yeah, I'm most grateful for health, to have a home, and to have a beautiful family.
Wonderful. Anybody else? Any other brave souls?
I will share too. I said in the beginning that I'm most grateful for Mario's recovery from his surgery. That's one of the big ones this year. And I'm also grateful to have faith to help me pull me out from difficult situations. I only thought of 2, sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. Shoot for the moon, land amongst the stars.
Yeah, nice. There you go.
Well, if no one else would like to share, that's totally fine. But we wanted to go ahead and dive into our presentation this evening about gratitude. And before we begin, I normally have the book in front of me, but I don't. But I do have another book. I have so many of her books that are just scattered all around my room. This is not a Joanna de Angelis book. Rather, this is a journal. You can purchase it off Amazon, but it's I don't know if I can, will it appear? Will it not appear? Okay, kind of. So this is a gratitude journal. You can find many different variations of it on Amazon, or you can just go to your local dollar store and start writing every day. Create a habit of writing about what you're grateful for, what you're thankful for. So, and we'll talk a little bit about that as well, obviously, as we go on through our talk today. But it's a really good habit to start, especially if you're not quite used to having this habit of every day getting up and saying what you're grateful for. Because you don't necessarily have to have a journal. However, it is helpful, especially when you want to train your mind, your emotions, to a new way of thinking, to sort of create new neural pathways in your brain to more positive thinking. And even within Spiritism and in science, doing so, creating healthy habits, really has an immensely positive impact on our physical, emotional, and mental health. Let's go right in and dive into this. So why do we bother even gathering together to talk about such topics? Why bother? Why is there, it seems like, you know, not just within Spiritism, but across the globe, the self-help industry is $1 billion industry. It's almost as if we have this innate desire to just be better, to want to seek something out better. And in fact, we learn that in the gospel, that we do have this incessant desire to better ourselves. It is what largely differentiates us from the animal kingdom. So we are always with this innate urge inside of us to want to be better. Thank God, because if not, what would become of us? But luckily, we have this within us. So we're always, whether knowingly or not, searching for something better than ourselves. But sometimes it's also really important to define or understand that which we are trying to reach or seek or bring more into our lives. And in this case, it's gratitude. So we're going to bring some understanding, obviously, from the book, The Psychology of Gratitude, from Joanna de Angelis, the spirit and mentor of Divaldo Franco, and her insights into what gratitude and how she defines it. So understanding the actual word itself, gratitude, from the Latin gratis, meaning grateful, or gratia, meaning grace, was first used in 1523, which means a state of being grateful, thankfulness. And Joanna defines gratitude, what we have split up into two things, two forms of gratitude. One we've called more basic gratitude. She says it's retribution for goodness or favor that one incurs. It's a form of restitution, at least in part. Instinct of self-preservation, stimulated towards pleasure. So there's a very basic level gratitude. So obviously the ways in which we were created, we seek out things that bring us pleasure, that are gratifying. That's a very basic understanding of gratitude. Everybody has it. So it means that each human being on this earth has the matrix already to practice this. So the basic model itself is there. We just have to develop it. And something of a more evolved gratitude, which is much deeper, more significant sentiments. It's not limited to the casual reward mechanism. It has a psychotherapeutic character to it. And it's a noble sentiment, says Joanna. Characterizes a psychologically mature individual. And grateful people are always happy and live fully. So we can see that there is a rudimentary gratitude or matrix that each person has. And based upon that, we can build from there. So there isn't any one person in this world who can honestly say, well, I can't practice gratitude. It's not a part of my repertoire. It's just not what I do. All it does, it takes practice. And it's a change in our mental state, which, by the way, if you aren't familiar with the term psychosphere, you know, the energy that we create around us, the vibrational energy we create around us, it's very important that we are aware that we have such a power to create this ambiance around us. this vibrations around us. So when we step into gratitude, when we begin to decide to change our perspective and start living in gratitude, it also modifies our psychosphere, which as spiritists we know has an immense effect on our overall well-being. Not to mention, it can make us more or less permeable to spirit reactions or spirit interference, we should say. So it is something that is to be attained. It should be one of our goals that we work towards. And Joanna just emphasizes this by saying that all who are grateful truly understand the significance of real gratitude. They enjoy physical, emotional, and psychological health. Who doesn't want that? I don't know a single person or a single patient in the 10 plus years, 15 plus years rather, I've been in healthcare, that doesn't want all three of those things: physical, emotional, and psychological health and well-being. If you don't, you'll be that you're more of an outlier and you're rare. But I truly believe that we all want to feel good. We all want to be happy. We all want to feel connected to source, to God, to our higher selves. So if Joanna is explaining this, it would behoove us to really make gratitude part of our everyday life, part of our daily repertoire. Because in the Spirit's book, we know what happens when we don't, or what happens when we practice ingratitude. They define it for us as ingratitude is the child of selfishness. And selfish individuals sooner or later will encounter hearts as hard as their own. So we know that living that kind of life, it is a reflection of a form of spiritual immaturity. We might be able to look back in your younger years or your earlier years when you were a child or a teenager or young adult and reflect back and look at how you understood your parents back then and look at how you understand your parents now. Just as one example. When you're young, we don't have this great understanding of the world and how it works. Not to mention our prefrontal cortex is not fully developed until age 24, but not wanting to get too much into science here. But when you're young, you're inexperienced, you don't realize how much our parents love us and how much the things that they do are because they want our well-being. So we tend to be sometimes ungrateful, but not always. But this is just an example that it is a sign of immaturity. So when we're experiencing that, or we have someone in our lives that seems ungrateful, just know as a sidebar, one important thing, and this is recently, we were discussing this with at our center about how do we deal with people who upset us, or rather not who upset us, but when we're on this path to spiritual enlightenment and we're working really hard towards that, but there are others that can't seem to appreciate that or seem to want to do things contrary to that, specifically people that are close to us. It could be spouses, partners, it could be family members oftentimes. So it's important for us to learn to separate what are someone else's issues and what are my issues. So if someone else is not able to practice gratitude yet, and quite the opposite, let's just say they're really not grateful for you and you're grateful for you in their lives. You might be someone that does a lot for them and they're just not able to fully get it yet. Well, just know, and it's something that Joanna talks about in her book, The Psychology of Gratitude, that it's important for us to recognize that it's not about being recognized. We need to be able to do good for goodness sake. We need to be able to practice being good to others and to emulate that. because the reality is there's a much more higher purpose in all that we do. But I digress, and let us understand from the Spirit's book, ingratitude is a child of selfishness. But understanding that, because we're talking a little bit about our emotional evolution here, and we're talking about, the complexities of, well, how do I deal with the relationships in my life? How do I deal with people when I'm trying to work on being grateful? And here I have this family member who, whenever I talk to them, they're just in a negative space and never are grateful, never are saying anything positive. Well, let's understand something, that there is an evolutionary process of our emotions. Joanna says there's emotional primariness. She says we hold ourselves back from progressing when we clutch to complaints, grievances, and reacting against the possibilities for renewal and recovery. So oftentimes, I'm sure you guys have heard this phrase that we are our own worst enemy. We need to get out of our own way and learn to stop that negative cycle, that habit of complaining about life. Because it is part of our human experience to some degree. And it's okay for us to express our emotions and to express our dislike, our uncomfortableness, or what have you. However, most importantly, we have to have this deeper understanding that, yes, I'm going through some challenges, but overall, big picture stuff, I'm grateful for this experience because ultimately it's going to lead me to be a better person. But that phrase right there, that emotion, doesn't always come very natural to all of us. And Joanna talks a lot about the evolution of our emotions. Before I move on, she also talks a lot about, not just in this book, and several other of her books, and I did want to share this because I think it's really important to understand this one aspect, this one important thing. I apologize if things are happening in the background here, is that we need to learn to extend grace to ourselves. What does that mean? We have to learn how to be compassionate to ourselves. And these are not my words. I mean, I'm paraphrasing Joanna, but this is what one of the things she teaches. In order for us sometimes to transition out of challenges and hardships and negative emotional states, we have to be gentle with our souls, with our hearts, with ourselves. Imagine if someone from your center or someone that you cared about deeply came to you. Would you say the same things you say to yourself to that person? It's highly likely you would not. So really, it's a dynamic change we have to make with how we're treating ourselves, being kinder to ourselves. Is very important. She goes on to talk about once we reach this emotional evolution of psychological maturity, we move ahead despite anything that she deems as distressing injunctions, which is a very beautiful word to put challenges, hardships, anything that might be upsetting to us. Once we've reached that level of maturity. So it's actually something, I don't know about you guys, but we feel it's something to really look forward to, because right now you might find yourself in a state where your peace is taken away from you every time something distressing happens. But it's something to look forward to, that the more and more we work on ourselves, that we can reach this point where it won't steal our peace, that we can live so much in gratitude and evolve emotionally, that despite what's happening and going on around us, we can still maintain that peace within ourselves. I don't know, because I think most of you are from Brazil, if not all. I don't know how much experience you've had, or I don't know how much of an opportunity you've had to actually be around Givaldo Franco. But I've been around him quite a bit since I was very young. So I have so many experiences with him. And one of the things, and my husband and I, Daniel and I talk about this sometimes, is that it's amazing, you know, when he steps down off the stage, because, you know, when we see a lecturer, they're on the stage, you know, he's doing his work. When he comes off the stage and you have the opportunity to talk with him a little bit or have dinner or whatever, he's such a jovial person. But if you learn of his life, especially if you had the opportunity to watch the biography of his life, he had and has a very challenging life. Very, very challenging. And probably most of us wouldn't make it through emotionally the things that he's endured in his life. Yet he always seems to maintain a real jovial spirit about him and just happy and in a state, an ever state of gratitude despite. Now you might say, well, his spirit guide is Joanna de Angelis. Well, he hasn't always really liked her. He makes a lot of jokes that she's very firm with him. But like a good mother or older sister, she was always there to guide him and still is. But just something for us to think about, something for us to look forward to, in a sense, as we progress moving forward, better things are to come. We also brought a quote from her book where she states, and we're going to explain this in a second, under the mandates of the shadows, the articulate self is befuddled and the infirm ego predominates, creating difficulties for the healing process. So in layman's terms, when we are working on ourselves, the more we are working on ourselves, we make that a goal for ourselves, we tend to encounter more difficulties for various different reasons. It's part of the healing process. And if any of you have ever had any type of surgery, you know, we often think, okay, I'm going to have this surgery and then all of my pain's going to go away. Let's say you had back surgery, reconstructive surgery, and you might think, okay, well, as soon as the surgeon does XYZ, I'll be good as new. Well, that's just the beginning of our healing process. And the body has a whole other process to go through. So it's the same when we're working on ourselves. We make that decision, which is a very healthy decision, to begin to heal. And then we begin to really encounter many different other parts of ourselves. Some parts of ourselves, which Joanna refers to as sometimes the shadow or the old self, rather. Our old selves that doesn't want us to do all this work, is complacent, is happy with right where we are, even though we're kind of unhappy, but it's still so used to it. So oftentimes people think, oh, I'm going to get on this road to self-enlightenment and healing. It's going to be great. It's going to be awesome. And there's a lot of challenges that can get thrown your way. And a lot of people, they stop, or they feel like it's too difficult, so they just go back to the way that they were because it's easier or it's habit. But hold fast, because it definitely is worth the work. She goes on to say, both moral discipline and edification of healthy habits lead to triumph over emotional disorders, preventing depression from settling in with all the charge of destruction. Moral discipline and edification of healthy habits. That's why from the beginning we were showing you the gratitude journal. This is just an example. For everyone, it might look different. Everyone, you can create your own healthy habit. Maybe it's walking and meditating, or maybe it's in the morning when you get up. Long time ago, growing up, I should say, My mother used to get up at 5 a.m. for years and years. I think it was like 4:45 she'd get up. She had this routine, and she had actually had it on a piece of paper for the longest time. And it was her routine. She'd get up like at 4:45 in the morning. She would do the gospel by herself. When we did it as a family, she got up to the gospel. She did all her prayers. She had her book of prayers of all the hundreds of people she prayed for. She had all these things that she used to do, which looking back now, it's either healthy habits, positive things that she was emulate for her children, obviously. One of the many reasons, I'm sure. But in this edification of healthy habits is going to look different for everybody. So don't feel like, well, I'm not a big journaler. I don't really write things down. I'm more of a talking kind of person. Creating the habit of having a daily conversation with God. And moral discipline, what about that? What does that look like? Moral discipline. Well, we know what it means to be disciplined. And hopefully we know, I believe everyone knows what it means to be moral. And bringing those two things together, we already know that being disciplined, how important. Emmanuel brought that to us, right? Everyone is probably familiar with that story with Emmanuel, Chico Xavier's mentor, and him telling him, discipline, 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 super important. And both these things, moral discipline and having healthy habits, require us to modify often our behaviors, our thoughts, and the things that we do. And that's why sometimes we find difficulty in them. That's why sometimes it's challenging when people give up or they get very distressed or stressed out over it, because we're trying to break old habits. She goes on to say that stimuli that pour from the habit of thinking ethically contribute to the production of neurotransmitters of wellness, and the self culminates in overcoming detrimental impositions, thus controlling the behavior which recuperates health. So our habit of how we think, do we know what it is? What we habitually think about? Do we pay attention to when we're watching TV shows and what those TV shows produce in our minds? I was listening to this psychologist from Brazil, Rosando Klinge, and he was saying, this is a while ago, that he started to have to watch certain TV series that he wouldn't normally watch, but because a lot of his patients often would refer to certain characters to describe certain emotional states, he felt the need to watch that. So for him, it was a very different experience watching things like Game of Thrones, which I personally, it's not something I would watch. But for him, it was watching it to understand his patients, to understand when his patients were describing certain scenarios. So why are we mentioning this? Well, we're mentioning this because everyone has different reactions to watching different things. So I'll give you an example. You might enjoy watching a lot of action-packed movies. However, there may be immense amount of moral teachings behind certain movies, certain storylines. So we can't take everything at face value and know that in our home, whenever we watch any type of movie together as a family, there's always a discussion at the end, even unconsciously or unintentionally, to talk about, what is the lesson in all of this? What can we learn from it? Instead of just experiencing something from a negative perspective. But I digress. It's important for us to first know what kind of thoughts and thought patterns we have in order for us to utilize this tactic that Joanna recommends, the habit of thinking ethically. And we might go out to, well, I don't know how often you can now because of the pandemic, but I had a friend of mine who used to say to me she loved to people watch. So she would go to the mall or sit in the cafeteria and sit with her husband or her friends, and she would just watch people and she just would judge them. Not maliciously necessarily, but she just liked to watch people and their interactions and human nature. And interestingly enough, she's studying psychology now, so it makes sense that at a young age it always intrigued her. But for some, you might be people watching and thinking a lot of negative thoughts. We know already in the Andrea Louise books, the collection of Andrea Louise books, that our thoughts have an immense power in our surrounding. And we know from Joanna, they have a physical effect on our well-being. We're elaborating this just to show how important this small act is on our overall health. And we don't normally think perhaps how much science can validate what Joanna's talking about. You know, when we talk about Spiritism, inevitably we understand that Spiritism is a science, a religion, and a philosophy. And that, as Kardec says in the Genesis, Spiritism and science complete each other. Science without Spiritism is completely unable to explain certain phenomenon solely by means of matter. And Spiritism without science would lack support and control. So we always have to bring in that certain aspects that exist out there in the world of science and research. So there's an eminent researcher in the field of gratitude. He is like the father of all gratitude. He is one of the, I suppose we may call him the pioneer in a sense. Dr. Robert Emmons did amazing work that you can find online on gratitude in his research. For us, as Spiritists, who already obviously believe what Joanna is saying, what Spiritism is bringing to us, this just further validates that science is already identifying this. That gratitude does create healthier states of mind and physical well-being. In one of the many research and papers that Dr. Robert Emmons published, he found that those who kept gratitude journals on a weekly basis, they exercised more regularly, reported fewer physical symptoms, felt better about their lives as a whole, and were more optimistic about the upcoming week compared to those who recorded hassles or neutral life events. He even did research with children, and he found that children who practice grateful thinking have more positive attitudes towards school and their families, and more likely to report having helped someone with a personal problem or having offered emotional support to another. So these are all instances where they studied people and children who practice gratitude and all the wonderful positive things that came out. He also found in his research that those who regularly attended religious services and engaged in religious activities such as prayer, reading religious material, were more likely to be grateful, and that grateful people are more likely to acknowledge a belief in the interconnectedness of all life and a commitment to and responsibility to others. And just as an added thought, gratitude does not require religious faith, but faith enhances the ability to be grateful. He also found that in his research, people were less materialistic when they're grateful. He says that grateful individuals place less importance on material goods. They are less likely to judge their own and other success in terms of possessions accumulated. They are less envious of others and more likely to share their possessions with others, with others relative to less grateful persons. So there's nothing that was found in the research that's negative about gratitude. So science has validated Spiritism once again and saying that it has a positive physiological, emotional, mental reaction when we create this habit of gratitude. And it truly needs to be a habit. And he was sharing that it was just even people who did it weekly. So it's not even something that you need to do daily necessarily if you feel like that's just too cumbersome and you've got too much going on. Well, in the same way that we have committed to having our God at home or gospel at home once a week, we could do the same with creating a routine of gratitude. It could be a journal, or it could be a discussion that you have with a friend or a family member that you make a conscious effort towards. Joanna explains to us that through our evolution of our emotions, she says, and I'm going to read her quote. She says, "The blossoming of consciousness is a slow and continuous work, which is the challenge of the process of evolution. Subscribing to God's laws in your heart, developing from within the concentrated effort of will as an essential goal of life." Why are we bringing this? We are bringing this because we don't want anyone to get discouraged. We don't want anyone to feel bad that perhaps up until this point, you haven't practiced it much or you haven't implemented it in your life, even if we did know that it's good. But everything, like in nature, it's a reflection of how God created us as well, is slow and continuous and requires our effort to evolve. So we're sharing that just so we also can understand that it's a process. We just have to stick with it. And there's a great, of course, the Spirit's book is great in and of itself. But one of the areas in the Spirit's book, it's the part 3 of the Spirit's book, the moral laws, is a great way to also understand and find gratitude. It might seem funny to say that. What is studying the divine natural laws? Well, because the more and more we study it, the more and more we get to know, there's so much gratitude to be had, to see how immense, how amazing God is in the ways that he created the world. There's even a book that's now in English, I believe, Evolution in Two Worlds, right? It's in English. Evolução em Dois Mundos, this is the Portuguese title. It's a fantastic book, but you might find yourself scratching your head because the intro to that book says that this book that's largely talks about scientific information about the evolution from the time we are created, we are amoebas, to the different kingdoms we go through. But the introduction of that book, it's the first time we read it, it seemed so funny. But it's dedicated, that book is dedicated for those who are suffering. And at first glance, you might think, what does a book that talks about the scientific aspect of Spiritism and the evolution, doesn't talk about consolation, doesn't talk about, giving you solace, touching your heart. No, but once you begin to read the book, you begin to realize how much we are loved by the Creator, that he put so much into his creation. And we're saying his, her, we're using his pronouns. It doesn't matter what we say, but we really begin to open up your mind to really feel your mind and heart, to feel gratitude. And it really is life-changing when you read such a book. And it really makes sense, and it's on purpose when you study a book like that as well as Psychology of Gratitude. How it really helps us to understand what it means to live in gratitude, to experience gratitude. It's life-changing. And in this book, Psychology of Gratitude, Joanna actually gives a living example, if you will, we're calling it a living example, of St. Francis of Assisi. She goes on to describe him in such a beautiful way. And she describes him as someone much like a fairy tale in a way. She says that he is very enchanted by life. Around him, the nature, people, everything, he was in awe of. He was enchanted by God's creation. The question posed, are we enchanted by life? Are we able to be awestruck? And let me see something. Make sure my internet's okay. Okay. So there's another little book I'll share with you. It's actually another journal. It's called Awestruck. You can find it on Amazon. And it's just a book, a journal that helps you to develop this enchantment for life, to appreciate, in a sense, to be grateful for life and everything that's wondrous about it. So something for us to think about. Are we enchanted by life? And she goes on to say and talk about legitimate gratitude. She says, demands that individuals be possessed of this inner sentiment of enchantment for life, the sweet rapture that makes life precious under any condition by which it manifests, so that we may understand the magic of existence in realizing the gifts that multiply in countless expressions of exchange. I think there's this, I think this is his name. There's a gentleman, I believe he's already been deceased for quite some time. I want to say his name was Geronimo Mendoza, Geronimo. He was the gentleman who was paralyzed. He had a paralyzing illness, and he used to go around giving talks of hope for other people. And if you could Google him and find pictures of him, and he'd always have to be in a position of laying down. And so there was an interview that he gave decades ago, and one of the things he was sharing was that people used to come up to him and say, "Oh, Geronimo, I'm suffering so much in my life. You know, I lost my job or this or that." And it's funny because he always had compassion for anyone that came to him. But it seems funny in a sense because here you have a gentleman who his whole life he lived in this uncomfortable physical state, but everything he did, he lived and breathed gratitude. He lived and breathed wanting to share the gospel, wanting to show others that despite our hardships, despite what life throws at us, we can still be happy. And Joanna teaches us that happiness, it's a choice. It's a conscious decision we need to make. It doesn't mean that once you make that decision that all of a sudden, boom, we're going to be happy. No. That's just a key to unlock the door to all the work we need to do. But once we make that conscious decision, you know what, I want to be more grateful. I want to be happy in my life. I want to experience this physical, emotional, psychological well-being. Once we can make that decision, Joanna says that it changes already our cells of our body, the energy around us, the smallest aspects of our cellular understanding, our mitochondria, if you will, it really begins to alter it for the better. So it really, when we think about gratitude, we often might think, well, it's something that you know, well, it just seems nice, we can do it. No, it actually is a form of medicine for us, for anyone. And it's free, and anyone can do it, and it's in all languages, and you don't have to purchase anything. You just have to practice it. Some take-home thoughts as we finalize with Joanna. She says, beyond simple speech, it is one's acts that should be considered as resources for human dignification. External peace starts within each one, and so it is with gratitude. And she says, be the embodiment of peace and gratitude. Know thyself. Begin to observe yourself, your habits. It's very difficult for us to change things that we are not really aware of. In the beginning chapters of Psychology of Gratitude, it wasn't something we wanted to bring this evening, only because it's much more time consuming. We actually did a study on this book. But she talks about the different archetypes, the different breakdown of the human psyche. And one of the archetypes are things that she uses to describe what lays in our unconscious, things that we, past memories, past experiences, past lives experiences, lays in what she refers to as the shadows. And we're not saying that we all need to access that archive of every single last detail, but at least making the effort to getting to know ourselves, because we can't change what we're not conscious of. Begin by showing small acts of gratitude. Call your parents on your birthday, express gratitude for your incarnation. I actually learned this from a physician I worked with years ago, and I was so awestruck by this because I'd never heard of anyone doing this. But she actually met someone else who did this later in life. I met someone else. However, she was the first person that I learned that she said when I met her, she already was well into her adult years. She said every year on her birthday, since she became an adult, since she was about 19 or 20, every year, no matter where she was, she would call her parents and thank them for giving her life. She never felt the need to have and she was a unique person, but she just felt this immense gratitude towards her parents and consequently towards her life. She was a very centered person, aside from being a great physician. She always seemed to have this air of peace about her. So it is something to work towards. Because with gratitude, we can find that peace that we all want. That peace, that solace, that feeling of comfort. We all want it, and it's definitely attainable. It just takes a little bit of work. So, with that being said, I thank you all. That is my time. I believe it went over a few minutes, but thank you all. I'm so grateful to be able to share Joanna's message on gratitude and to share just the understanding of gratitude in general. If nothing else, if you can walk away or disconnect from this talk this evening, my hope, my prayer is that you can begin to practice gratitude in whatever form resonates with you. So thank you all. Thank you, Vivi. Thank you, Hosanna. Thank you, everybody else, for being here and for inviting us. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for giving me this platform to be here and be present with all of you.